The alarm never gets the chance to go off. I'm usually awake before it, lying there for a minute or two, listening to the house settle around me the way it always has. 20 years in the same small house will do that to you. You stop hearing the pipes groan. You start to find comfort in it instead. I make coffee in the same chipped mug I've used since before my husband passed, the one with the faded blue rooster on the side. The cabinet above the sink still doesn't close right, so there's a strip of tape holding it shut, the same piece I put there back in the spring still doing its job. On my way out, I grab a coupon off the fridge, one I clipped from Sunday's flyer for canned tomatoes. Nobody looking at me would guess that 8 months ago my whole life changed. That's somewhere in a lawyer's office downtown. There's a piece of paper with my name on it, and more zeros than I know what to do with. I haven't told a soul. Not yet. Some things, once you say them out loud, you can never take back. Every Friday I buy one ticket. $1. I've done it for over 20 years now, long before there was any money worth talking about, and long before there was so much of it I couldn't spend it in 3 lifetimes. It started with my mother. She used to say hope was worth $1, and that if you couldn't spare $1 for hope, you had bigger problems than money. She'd send me down to the corner store with a crumpled bill in my hand and tell me to pick the numbers that meant something. Not just any numbers. Numbers that belonged to us. So I still play the same ones. Birthdays mostly. People I've loved. People I've lost. I've never told anyone what they are or why, not even the cashiers who've rung me up 100 times over the years. It's not the kind of thing you explain out loud. It's the kind of thing you just carry. You'd think winning would change that. It didn't. If anything, it made the ritual feel more important, not less. Because now, more than ever, that Friday dollar isn't about the money. It never really was. It's about being the person I was before any of this happened. The one who still believes $1 can hold a little bit of hope in it, even when you don't need the money it might bring. Every Friday I buy one ticket. $1. I've done it for over 20 years now, long before there was any money worth talking about, and long before there was so much of it I couldn't spend it in 3 lifetimes. It started with my mother. She used to say hope was worth $1, and that if you couldn't spare $1 for hope, you had bigger problems than money. She'd send me down to the corner store with a crumpled bill in my hand and tell me to pick the numbers that meant something. Not just any numbers. Numbers that belonged to us. So I still play the same ones. Birthdays mostly. People I've loved. People I've lost. I've never told anyone what they are or why, not even the cashiers who've rung me up 100 times over the years. It's not the kind of thing you explain out loud. It's the kind of thing you just carry. You'd think winning would change that. It didn't. If anything, it made the ritual feel more important, not less. Because now, more than ever, that Friday dollar isn't about the money. It never really was. It's about being the person I was before any of this happened. The one who still believes $1 can hold a little bit of hope in it, even when you don't need the money it might bring. The store hasn't changed much in the 20-some years I've been coming here. The fluorescent light over the produce section still flickers if you stand under it too long. The cart with the squeaky wheel is always somehow the one I end up with, no matter how many times I try to grab a different one. And there's a smell that hits you the second you walk through the door. Warm bread from the little bakery counter in the back, mixed with the faint chill of the freezer aisle. I could walk this place with my eyes closed. But today, something about it feels a little more tired than usual. The floor tiles near the entrance look more scuffed than I remember. There's a handwritten "Help Wanted" sign taped crooked in the front window. The kind of sign that's been up just long enough to start curling at the corners. I mention it to Ruth, the cashier who's worked here about as long as I have, while I'm grabbing a basket. She sighs and tells me she's finally retiring at the end of the month, that her hip just can't take the standing anymore. Says they've got someone new covering the register most days this week, training up before she leaves for good. I don't think much of it. Just nod, tell her she's earned the rest, and head toward the register like I always do. I have no idea walking up there that anything about today is going to be different at all. There's only one person ahead of me in line, so I have a minute to stand there with my basket and let my mind wander, the way it tends to do in quiet moments like this. It always circles back to the same question. Why haven't I told anyone? Not my friends. Not what's left of my family. Not a single soul beyond the lawyer's office and the accountant I met with twice and now only talk to by phone. I've had 8 months to say something and 8 months of choosing not to. I think about my cousins sometimes. Years back, she came into a modest inheritance, nothing close to what I have now, and I watched it take her apart piece by piece. People who hadn't called her in years suddenly couldn't stop calling. Old friends started asking for loans they never meant to pay back. By the end of it, she couldn't tell anymore who actually cared about her and who just liked being near the money. I made myself a promise after that, long before I ever imagined it would apply to me. I wasn't going to become someone people only loved for a check. I'd already lost enough to money once before, in a way I still don't like to think about, in a way that left a mark I've carried quietly for a long time. The line moves. The woman ahead of me gathers her bags and steps aside, and it's my turn now. I set my basket on the belt and pull out the little slip of paper I filled out at home. The same numbers I've written down so many times my hand barely has to think about it anymore. My mind is still half back in that memory, still turning over things I don't usually let myself think about, so I don't really look up. I just slide the ticket across the counter along with a single dollar bill. Smoothed flat from sitting in my coat pocket all morning. The register makes its familiar little chime. I hear the soft rustle of the ticket being picked up, the small shuffle of a hand counting out nothing back to me, since $1 for a dollar ticket doesn't leave any change. It's such an ordinary sound. I've heard it 1,000 Fridays before this one. I start to say my usual thing, something about how maybe this'll finally be the week, half a joke I've made to more cashiers than I can count over the years. But the words catch somewhere in my throat before I even get them out, because a voice answers me first. Says my name. Not ma'am. Not next customer. My actual name spoken low and uncertain, like the person saying it isn't fully sure they should. Something about the way it sounds stops me cold. Right there with my hand still resting on the counter. It's familiar in a way that doesn't make sense yet, in a way that reaches back further than it should for a stranger behind a register. I lift my eyes. It's Daniel. My brother's face has aged in ways I never got to watch happen. There are lines near his eyes that weren't there before. A tiredness settled into his features that goes deeper than just needing sleep. His hair has thinned at the temples. But underneath all of it, underneath 15 years of whatever life did to him, it's still him. Still the same face I used to see across our mother's kitchen table. His hand is still in the air, my lottery ticket caught between two fingers, frozen the way a picture freezes. He isn't moving. I don't think either of us is breathing. For a second, my mind refuses to catch up with my eyes. It's like looking at a photograph that somehow stepped out of its frame and started aging on its own, without my permission, without me there to see it happen. The boy I remember and the man standing in front of me don't line up right away. They take a moment to fold into each other and become one person. Neither of us says anything. The seconds stretch out longer than seconds should. Somewhere behind me, I hear a cartwheel squeak, someone shifting their weight. A woman further back in line letting out a small, impatient sigh at whatever's causing the holdup. None of them have any idea. To them, this is just a stalled checkout line on an ordinary Friday. They can't see what's happening in the 3 feet of space between me and this register. But I know exactly what's happening. 15 years just walked up to a cash register and called me by name. For half a second, I think about just leaving. I could turn around, walk straight out of that store, leave my basket sitting right there on the belt, and never come back to this particular grocery store again. There are other stores, other registers. I could pretend I never heard my name, pretend the voice belonged to someone else, some stranger who only sounded like the past for a moment. Nobody would know. Nobody but me. Some old, well-worn part of me wants exactly that. The part that remembers exactly how much it cost me the last time I let this man matter to me. I made myself a promise a long time ago, quiet and private, that I would never again stand somewhere vulnerable enough for him to hurt me twice. That part of me is already bracing, already pulling up walls I built brick by brick over 15 long years. But there's another part of me, smaller and a lot less careful, that can't stop looking at him. At how thin he's gotten. At the way that uniform shirt hangs off his shoulders like it was made for a bigger man. At his hands still trembling slightly around my ticket. Hands I used to hold crossing streets when he was small enough to need me. I don't leave. My feet stay planted right where they are. And against every ounce of self-protection I've spent years building, I open my mouth to speak. Eleanor. He says it again, quieter this time, almost like he's testing whether the word will hold, whether I'll actually still be standing there once it leaves his mouth. His voice cracks right down the middle of it. It's a sound I remember, the same way his voice used to catch when he was a kid trying not to cry in front of me. He sets my ticket down on the counter with more care than the task requires, like his hands aren't fully steady enough to trust with anything faster. He doesn't look at me straight on. His eyes keep sliding away down to the register, over to the bagging area, anywhere but directly at my face. I know that look. I've seen it before a long time ago, right before he'd admit to something he knew he shouldn't have done. He doesn't say sorry. Not yet. But everything about the way he's standing there tells me he's been waiting for a moment like this for a long time. Maybe dreading it, maybe half hoping for it too. Like some part of him has been rehearsing this exact scene for years without ever expecting to actually live it. "Hi, Daniel," is all I manage back. 2 words. Careful, flat, giving nothing away. Because I am not about to fall apart in the middle of a checkout line with 3 strangers watching and waiting for their turn. Behind me, someone clears their throat. Not subtle about it either, the kind of pointed little cough that means whatever this is, please wrap it up. It breaks whatever strange bubble the 2 of us had been standing inside. I blink and suddenly I'm just a woman at a checkout counter again, with a cart full of groceries and a line building up behind her. I fumble for my card, tap it against the reader without really registering the total, and it doesn't even occur to me in that moment that I could pay for every single item in this store without blinking. That thought is somewhere far away right now. All I can think about is the man standing across the counter from me. Daniel isn't doing much better. His hands shake as he tries to bag a few of my things, and in his rush to fill the silence with something, anything, he says the kind of sentence that slips out before a person means it to. He mentions, almost in passing, that he's been sleeping in his car most nights the last few months, that the store let him shower in the back sometimes before his shift. I don't say anything to that. I keep my face steady, take my bags, nod like it's just another piece of small talk. But inside, something in me cracks a little at those words, quiet and sharp. The kind of ache you feel but don't let show. There's no plan made. No number exchanged, no promise to come back. Just one last look between us, unfinished, heavy with everything neither of us said, before I turn and walk out the door. I make it to my car before anything gives way. I get the door shut, the groceries dropped haphazardly onto the passenger seat, and then I just sit there, both hands on the wheel, staring at nothing in particular. That's when it hits me all at once, the way a wave doesn't ask permission before it knocks you over. My hands start shaking first. Then my breath goes uneven, catching in my chest like it can't decide whether it wants to come out as a sob or a laugh or something in between. 15 years of not knowing where he was, whether he was alive, whether I'd ever see him again. All of it rising up at once alongside something new now too, something sharper. Worry. Real immediate worry. For a man sleeping in his car a few miles from a house I own outright and barely use half of. I look down and realize I'm still holding the lottery ticket. I never handed it back to him to file behind the counter the way I usually do. I turn it over in my fingers, and for the first time in 20 years those numbers feel like they're carrying more weight than they ever have before. They were never just numbers. They were always about people. About what we chose to remember. For just a moment, I hear my mother's voice, clear as anything, saying something I'm not ready to sit with yet. I let it pass through me and set it gently aside. By the time my breathing steadies, I've made a decision. I need to know what happened to him. All of it. Before I decide anything else. I pull into my driveway, but I don't go inside right away. I turn the engine off and just sit there, the quiet of the car settling around me the way it does after a long drive. Even though the drive itself was only 10 minutes. I think about the years since he left. Not with the anger I used to carry, the kind that would flare up out of nowhere on some random Tuesday for no reason I could name. Just a tired kind of sadness now, worn soft at the edges from being carried so long. There was a stretch of time years ago, when I'd find myself scanning the obituaries in the local paper without even meaning to, my eyes catching on the names before my mind had decided to look. I never told anyone I did that. It felt like something you weren't supposed to admit, checking to see if your own brother had died somewhere without you knowing. The truth is, I didn't just lose a brother when he left. I lost someone I practically raised. He was so much younger than me, and for a long stretch of his childhood, I was more mother to him than sister, packing his lunches, sitting up when he had nightmares, showing up to every school thing our own mother couldn't get off work for. You don't stop loving someone like that just because they hurt you. The love doesn't go anywhere. It just sits there unresolved, waiting. Sitting in that driveway, I realize I need to know what happened to him. All of it. That evening, after the groceries are put away and the house has gone quiet around me, I do something I never expected I'd do. I sit down at my computer and I search his name. I don't really know what I'm hoping to find. Maybe some sign of a life I could recognize, a job, a home, people who cared about him. What I find instead is almost nothing. No social media, no listed address, nothing that tells me where he sleeps most nights besides what he already told me himself. Just a scattering of public records, cold and clinical. Property lien from years back. A bank account that shows as closed. The kind of digital trail a person leaves when they've spent a long time trying not to be found, or maybe just trying to survive quietly enough that nobody asks questions. I sit with that for a long while, the cursor blinking on an empty search bar, feeling the pull of two different instincts at once. Part of me wants to drive back to that store tonight, to knock on whatever door he's living behind and demand answers. But another part of me, the more careful part, knows that pushing too hard, too fast, could send him running again the same way he ran before. So I decide to wait. Not to disappear on him, not to let this go, but to give it a few days before I go back. Friday will come soon enough. I call Marisol before I lose my nerve. She's the only one besides my accountant who knows about the money, the only person I've trusted with the whole truth of my life since it changed 8 months ago. We've been friends long enough that she doesn't need me to explain myself to make sense of what I'm feeling. She just listens. I tell her everything. The register, his face, the ticket still frozen in his hand. She's quiet for a second, and then in that careful, protective way she has, she asks the question I've been avoiding asking myself. What if he only wants back in now because somehow, someway he's heard about the money? I don't think he knows, I say, though even as I say it, I hear how uncertain I sound. You don't know that he doesn't, she says, gently, not unkindly. She's not wrong to wonder. She was there years ago when I watched what money did to my cousin, watched people circle back into her life the second they smelled a payday. She knows exactly why I've kept this secret from everyone, including what little family I have left. I don't have a good answer for her. I honestly don't know what he wants, or if he wants anything from me at all beyond being seen again. But I know I'm not willing to decide who he is now based on who he was 15 years ago, not without finding out for myself first. After I hang up with Marisol, my mind drifts somewhere I don't let it go very often. Back to our mother. She died 11 years ago now, though some days it feels like it happened much longer ago than that, and other days it feels like it just happened last week. Daniel wasn't at the funeral. I understand now, in a way I couldn't back then, that he probably didn't even know she'd passed. At the time, all I knew was that I stood at that graveside alone, without a single sibling beside me, and went home afterward to sort through what little our mother had left behind by myself. Her clothes, her chip dishes, a shoebox of old photographs I still haven't fully gone through even now. It was in that shoebox that I found it. A sealed envelope, our mother's handwriting across the front, addressed simply to Daniel. No return address, no explanation, just his name written in the careful, looping script she always used. I had no way to reach him back then. No address, no number, nothing. So I did the only thing I could do. I kept it safe. It's still sitting in the drawer of my dresser, right where I placed it 11 years ago, sealed and untouched, waiting for a version of this moment I'd stopped believing would ever actually come. I decide right then that I'll bring it with me next Friday. The days between that Monday and Friday pass slower than days usually do. I go through the motions of my normal life, watering plants, answering emails from my accountant, having lunch with Marisol, but underneath all of it, my mind keeps wandering back to the same place. Not to the register. Not yet. Further back than that. I find myself trying to trace it, almost against my will, back to some starting point. Some moment where things between Daniel and me first began to bend before they finally broke. It's harder to find than I expect. There wasn't one single day where everything changed. It was slower than that, quieter than that, the kind of drift you don't notice happening until you're already standing on opposite shores. I've realized something sitting with all of this the last few days. If I'm going to understand what happened at that register, if I'm going to understand the man he's become, I have to go back further first. I have to understand who we were before any of this, back when we were just a sister and a brother in a small house, long before either of us had any idea how far apart we'd eventually drift. So before Friday comes, before I walk back through those doors, let me tell you about who we used to be. 20 years ago, our father left, and our mother did what she always did. She kept going. She picked up extra shifts at the diner, came home smelling like coffee and fryer oil, and never once let us see how tired she really was. I was in my early 30s by then, still living close by, and somewhere along the way, without either of us really deciding it, I became more than just Daniel's big sister. I became the one who helped with homework at the kitchen table most nights, who made sure he ate something other than cereal for dinner when our mother's shift ran long. Our mother had a gift for making very little feel like enough. On Sunday evenings, the three of us would sit around that same kitchen table and play cards for pennies, laughing over hands that barely mattered, stretching out the pot until it was worth a whole dollar in loose change. And every Friday, without fail, she'd send one of us down to the corner store with a dollar bill to play the same numbers we always played. Birthdays, anniversaries, people we loved. It was never about winning. It was about the three of us together choosing hope on purpose once a week, no matter how little else we had. Everything changed the year our mother got sick. It started small, a persistent cough she waved off as nothing, a tiredness she blamed on double shifts. But it didn't stay small. The diagnosis came back worse than any of us wanted to hear. A progressive illness that meant ongoing treatment, and treatment meant money, and our insurance covered barely enough to matter. I remember sitting across from her at that same kitchen table, watching her try to make the numbers work in her head the way she used to make a dollar stretch for groceries, except this time there wasn't a version of stretching that got us there. I took on a second job within the month. I started keeping a small fund, contributions from a couple of relatives who could spare a little, whatever I could add from my own savings after rent. It became something I managed carefully, almost obsessively, because it felt like the one thing standing between our mother and going without care she needed. Daniel was in his early 20s then, and he wanted to help. I could see that much clearly. But wanting to help and knowing how to help were two different things for him. He drifted between jobs that never quite stuck, growing more anxious by the month, watching our mother get smaller and more tired every time we saw her, carrying a helplessness he didn't know what to do with. None of us knew yet what that helplessness would eventually cost. What I didn't know back then, what I wouldn't find out until much later, was that Daniel was drowning in a different kind of trouble entirely. He'd tried starting a small business a year or so before. Something with a friend that fell apart fast, leaving him with debts he had no way of covering. People he owed money to had started calling, then showing up, the kind of pressure that keeps a person awake at 3 in the morning with their stomach in knots. He never told any of us. I think looking back he was too ashamed. Here he was, watching me work 2 jobs to keep our mother's care fund growing, watching our family scrape together whatever we could out of love, while he was quietly falling apart under a weight he'd created and couldn't admit to. I imagine now what those weeks must have looked like from inside his head. The panic building a little more each day. The math that never worked no matter how many times he ran it. And somewhere in that spiral, a thought must have taken root, quiet and dangerous, the kind of thought that convinces a desperate person of something they'd never believe on a normal day. That he could borrow just this once, just enough to make the call stop. That he'd pay it back before anyone noticed. That no one would ever have to know. He was wrong about all of it. But I understand now that he wasn't cruel. He was drowning. A few weeks later, I went to the bank to pull out money for a treatment payment that couldn't wait. The number on the screen didn't match the number in my head. I remember staring at it, doing the math over and over, certain I was the one who'd made a mistake somewhere. I hadn't. Thousands of dollars were gone from that account. Money that was supposed to keep our mother's care from falling apart. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and went through the timeline in my head, piece by piece, and there was only one person besides me who had access to that account. Only one person it could have been. I didn't yell when I confronted him. I don't think I had it in me to yell. I just asked him plainly if he knew where the money went, and I watched his face answer before his mouth ever caught up to it. He stammered through an explanation, something about needing it for a little while, about paying it all back before anyone would notice, words that might have meant something to me in a different situation for a different reason. But our mother was getting worse by the week. There wasn't time for eventually. There wasn't room for good intentions that came too late. I remember feeling strangely calm, almost hollow, like something inside me had quietly closed a door. It would take a very long time to open again. Within a few days he was gone. No note. No explanation beyond the one he'd already given me in that stammering, hollow confrontation. I called his phone a handful of times that first week, and by the second week it was already disconnected, the number just gone, like he'd wanted to make sure there was no way back in even if he'd changed his mind. I was left to hold everything alone after that. The care fund, what was left of it. The appointments. Our mother, who kept asking where her son had gone. And me, who never had a good enough answer to give her. I absorbed the financial gap the best I could, working, saving, patching the hole he'd left behind. But that was never really the hardest part. The hardest part was the silence where my brother used to be. Looking back on it now, from where I'm sitting today, there's something I still carry that has nothing to do with the money at all. I never got the chance to say the things I wish I'd said to him before he vanished. Not forgiveness exactly. I wasn't ready for that, not then, maybe not even now. Just understanding. Just one honest conversation, instead of an accusation and a silence that swallowed 15 years whole. That's part of why seeing him again, standing behind that register, mattered so much more than either of us could have said out loud in that moment. The years that followed settled into a rhythm of their own, one built almost entirely around taking care of our mother. I learned things I never expected to learn. How to change a medical dressing without flinching. How to read a doctor's face before he even opened his mouth, and know from the set of his jaw whether the news was going to be good or bad that day. How to sit through a hospital waiting room at 2 a.m, back straight, hands folded, waiting for someone to come tell me something I already half knew. I never remarried, never had children of my own. People ask me about that sometimes gently, the way people do when they think there's a sad story behind a simple fact, and maybe there was. There wasn't much room left in those years for building something new. Most of what I had to give, I gave to her. And whatever was left over went quietly toward missing my brother in a way I never talked about out loud. I don't say any of this looking for sympathy. It's just what those years were. Long, steady. Mine to carry, and I carried them because there was no one else standing there to help me lift. But even in the exhaustion of it, I found something in myself I hadn't known was there before. A kind of quiet strength that doesn't announce itself. It just keeps showing up, appointment after appointment, night after night, because someone has to. In her final weeks, our mother grew weaker, but her mind stayed clear right up until the end. She had a way of saying things in those last days that felt like she was setting things in order, one conversation at a time, like a woman making sure the house was tidy before she left it for good. One afternoon, she took my hand and asked me for a promise. She said she didn't want me carrying anger forever, that whatever Daniel had done, it came from fear, not cruelty, and that fear makes people do things they'd never otherwise choose. She told me family wasn't supposed to be lost over money, not ours, not after everything we'd already survived together. I didn't say much back. I just nodded because arguing with a dying woman about the son who broke her heart felt like something I didn't have the strength for. Not then. A few days later, she asked for paper and a pen, and she wrote something slowly, resting between sentences, sealing it herself once she was done. She handed it to me and told me it was for Daniel, that I should give it to him when the time was right, and that she trusted me more than anyone to know when that time had come. I took the envelope and told her I would, but privately, grieving and still raw from everything he'd done, I doubted I'd ever get the chance or, truthfully, the willingness to actually deliver it. She passed a few days after that, quietly in her sleep, the way I think she would have wanted it if anyone had thought to ask her. There was a kind of mercy in how peaceful it was, even if nothing about losing her felt peaceful to me. The funeral was small. A handful of old friends from the diner, a neighbor or two who'd known her for decades, people who'd watched Daniel and me grow up down the street from them. I tried every number I could find for him in the days before, every old address, even reaching out to a few people who used to know him, but nothing came back. No answer. No sign that the message had even reached him at all. I stood at that graveside by myself, the only one of her 2 children present to say goodbye. I remember the weight of my coat that day, and inside the pocket, the weight of something else entirely, that sealed envelope with his name written across the front in her careful handwriting. I kept touching it without meaning to, like I needed to check it was still there. I didn't know, standing in that cemetery, if I'd ever get the chance to give it to him. I didn't even know, if I'm honest, whether I wanted to. Grief has a way of making forgiveness feel very far away, even when someone you love has asked you for it with her last good breaths. I just knew I'd carry it until I figured out what to do. Friday comes again the way it always does, whether you're ready for it or not. Before I leave the house, I open the top drawer of my dresser, the one I don't go into much anymore, and I find the envelope right where it's been for 11 years. The paper has gone slightly soft at the corners with age, the ink of his name a little faded, but it's still there, still sealed, still waiting for whatever moment I decide is finally the right one. I turn it over in my hands for a long time, standing in my quiet bedroom, debating with myself. Am I ready for whatever this reopens? Is he? There's no version of this that feels entirely safe, but I'm starting to understand that some things were never meant to feel safe. They're just meant to be done anyway. It strikes me, standing there, how strange my life has become. There was a time when I fought for every single dollar I had, when a missing 20 from an account could mean the difference between keeping the lights on or not. Now I have more money than I could spend in the years I have left. And still, none of that is what has my hands trembling this morning. It's this envelope. It's what's written inside it, and what it might set back in motion between my brother and me. I slip it into my coat pocket, grab my keys, and head out to the car. I park in the same spot I always do, close enough to the entrance to see through the front windows, and for a minute I just sit there with my hands tight around the wheel, engine off, the letter still resting in my coat pocket like something alive. I think for a moment about just driving away, going home, letting things stay exactly as they were before last Friday, back when my life was simpler, back when I only had one secret to carry instead of two. It would be so easy. Nobody would ever know I'd chickened out. Nobody but me. But then I think of my mother, sitting up in that bed in her final weeks, asking me for a promise I never fully believed I'd get the chance to keep. I think of 15 years already spent, already lost, time I can't get back no matter how carefully I guard myself from here on out. Sitting in this car isn't going to bring any of that time back either. So I make myself get out. I walk toward the entrance slower than I probably need to, my eyes drifting to the front windows, scanning the registers the way I did last week, half expecting to find someone else standing there instead of him, half afraid of exactly what I'll do if that's the case. But it isn't the case. Through the glass I see him. And this time there's no basket in my hands, no line of strangers between us, no excuse for either of us to look away. He sees me coming. He asks his manager for a short break the second I walk in, and a few minutes later we're standing outside together in the narrow alley behind the store, away from the registers, away from anyone who might overhear. It smells like cardboard and cold concrete back there. Nothing romantic about the setting at all, but it's private, and right now, private is what matters. Neither of us seems to know how to start. 15 years is a lot to fit into a 10-minute break, and for a moment we just stand there, hands in our pockets, the silence stretching out between us the way it did at the register, only quieter this time without an audience. I decide not to bring up the letter yet. It's sitting right there in my coat, but this doesn't feel like the moment for it. Instead, I ask him something simpler. Where has he been? How did he end up here behind this particular register, in this particular town? He answers slowly, like he's choosing each word carefully, not to protect himself, but because it's hard to say out loud. He tells me about the cities he moved through, one after another, the jobs that never lasted more than a few months, the stretches of time he spent without any address at all. He doesn't make excuses for any of it. He just lays it out, plain and unpolished, like a man who's stopped trying to make his own story sound better than it was. I ask him the question I've carried for 15 years, the one that's been sitting under everything else I've ever felt about him. I ask him why. Why he took the money, and why he never once came back, not even to explain, not even to see if there was anything left to save. He doesn't look away this time. He tells me about the debt, the people who came looking for him, the fear that had built up in him so gradually, he hadn't noticed how deep it had gotten until it was already swallowing him whole. He says taking that money is the thing he's most ashamed of in his entire life, and that the shame itself is what kept him from ever coming back. He tells me that once he'd done it, some part of him decided he didn't deserve to be let back in, that our mother and I were better off without someone who could do something like that to the people who loved him most. I know sorry doesn't fix it, he says, voice low, steady in a way it hasn't been all day. I don't expect you to forgive me. I didn't even expect to see you again, honestly. This already feels like more than I thought I'd ever get. I study his face while he says it, looking for the old excuses, the deflection I remember from years ago. I don't find any. Just a tired, honest man finally saying the thing he should have said 15 years earlier. Something in the way he says our mother present tense easy, like she's just somewhere else waiting on him to sort himself out, makes me go very still. Daniel, I say carefully, how long has it been since you talked to Mom? He shrugs like it's a simple question with a simple answer. Says he figures she's still at the same house, still working too hard, probably still worried sick about him, though he's been too ashamed to call and confirm it either way. That's when I understand. He doesn't know. I have to be the one to tell him, right there in that alley behind the store, that she passed away 11 years ago. That I tried everything I could think of to find him before the funeral, and none of it worked. That he spent over a decade believing a version of the world that hasn't existed for a very long time. He doesn't say anything at first. He just goes still, the same kind of stillness I remember from the register last week, except this time there's no confusion behind his eyes, just the slow sinking weight of 11 years collapsing into a single sentence. His eyes fill, though he doesn't let the tears fall, blinking hard instead, jaw tight, like a man trying to hold himself together with nothing but sheer will. My hand moves almost on its own toward the bag on my shoulder. I can feel the edge of the envelope through the fabric of my bag, close enough to pull out right there and hand to him, but something in me holds back. This isn't the place. A 10-minute break in a cold alley behind a grocery store, both of us still raw from what I just told him, isn't the setting our mother had in mind when she pressed that letter into my hands and asked me to wait for the right moment. Handing it to him now, rushed, with a manager probably watching the clock, would cheapen something she meant to matter. So I let my hand fall back to my side instead. There's more I need to tell you, I say. But not here. Not like this. I ask him if he'd be willing to come to my house for dinner, somewhere quiet, somewhere we can actually talk without a clock running out on us. He looks at me like he wasn't expecting anything beyond this alley, like the idea that there might be a next conversation at all catches him off guard. He says yes before I even finish getting the question out, gratitude written plainly across his face, the kind of relief that comes from being given more chances than you thought you had left. We agree on a night. His break is nearly over, and as he heads back toward the door, I can tell we both feel the same thing settling between us. This conversation isn't finished. It's only just beginning. The drive home feels different than the one from last Friday. Heavier in some ways, given everything we just said out loud in that alley, but lighter too somehow in a way I don't fully expect. Like some old weight I've been carrying alone for 15 years just got shared with someone else for the first time. I turn the whole conversation over in my mind, replaying pieces of it at every stoplight. The debt, the shame, the 11 years he spent thinking our mother was still out there somewhere, waiting on a phone call that never came. None of it undoes what happened, but none of it feels like the same story I've been telling myself all this time either. Somewhere around the halfway point home, a thought creeps in that surprises me. I let myself think seriously for the first time about eventually telling him about the money. Not as some kind of rescue, not as a way to buy back 15 lost years in one grand gesture. Just as something I might choose to share later, if trust gets rebuilt the slow, careful way trust actually gets rebuilt. I hear Marisol's voice in the back of my mind, cautious as always, and I don't dismiss it. I'm not naive about any of this. But for the first time since winning that money, the question in my head isn't only how do I protect myself from being hurt again. It's what kind of sister do I actually want to be, now that I have the chance to be one again at all. Daniel's studio apartment isn't much. One room really, with a bed pushed against the wall and a small table by the window that serves as kitchen, desk, and everything in between. He only moved in a few months ago, after a long stretch of nights spent in his car. And even now, it's sparse in a way that says he's still getting his footing. But it's clean. Careful. Everything has its place, like a man who's learned not to take having a place at all for granted. On the table sits a half-finished job application, the pen still resting where he left it. Beside it, a second-hand book on managing money, its spine cracked from actual use, not decoration. On the wall, a small calendar hangs with certain dates circled, quiet little markers of savings goals he's been chipping away at, one modest paycheck at a time. None of this was for anyone's benefit but his own. Long before Eleanor ever walked back into his life, Daniel had already been trying slowly and privately to become someone worth being found by, even if he never believed that day would actually come. Some nights, sitting alone in that small room, the quiet gets loud in its own way. It's in those quiet hours that his mind tends to drift backward, all the way back to the moment everything started to unravel. The years right after he left are the ones Daniel doesn't let himself think about very often. Not because he's forgotten them, because he remembers them too well. The shame came first, and it came fast, settling into him before he'd even made it out of the state. Every time he thought about picking up a phone and calling home, that same shame would rise up and stop his hand before it reached his pocket. He told himself Eleanor and their mother were better off without a call from someone like him. It was easier, in a strange way, to disappear completely than to face what he'd done in even the smallest way. The work that followed was never steady. Warehouse shifts, kitchen jobs, whatever paid in cash and didn't ask too many questions. Somewhere in the middle of all that drifting, he lost himself for a while to something he still doesn't talk about easily, a rough stretch he only pulled out of through stubbornness and a court-mandated program after some trouble that could have been much worse than it was. He never once reached out for help from family during any of it. In his mind, that kind of help wasn't his to ask for anymore. He'd forfeited it the day he emptied that account. Now, getting ready for dinner at Eleanor's house, he wonders if any of that is something he's ready to say out loud. The day before dinner, Daniel can't seem to settle on anything. He runs through what he might say to Eleanor a dozen different ways, none of them ever landing quite right in his head. Some part of him keeps circling back to the same worry, quiet but persistent, that the invitation was just politeness, a formality extended in a moment of shock, not something she actually meant with her whole heart. He doesn't want to show up empty-handed, even though there isn't much room in his budget for anything extra. On his shift that afternoon, he stops by the small flower section near the front of the store, the one he restocks most mornings, and picks out a modest bunch, paid for with the employee discount that barely makes a dent in what little he has left until his next check. It isn't much. He knows that. But it's honest, and lately, honest is the only currency he trusts himself to offer anyone, especially her. He sets the flowers on his kitchen table that night, next to the job application and the savings calendar, and looks at them for a long moment, hoping they'll say something he isn't sure he has the words for yet. Tomorrow, he tells himself, he'll find out if 15 years can actually be walked back at all, one honest dinner at a time. I spend the afternoon before he arrives in my kitchen, hands busy with something familiar, a simple pot roast our mother used to make on Sunday afternoons, the kind of meal that never needed fancy ingredients to feel like love. I could have made anything tonight. I could have hired someone to make anything tonight. But that was never the point, and some part of me knew it wouldn't be, long before I ever picked up a knife to peel the potatoes. While it simmers, I think through the evening more times than I probably need to. The letter sits upstairs, waiting, and I decide it should come later, after the meal, once we've both had a little time to settle into being in the same room together without the weight of an audience or a clock. It deserves more than being handed over the second he walks through the door. The money is trickier. I turn it over in my mind, wondering whether tonight is even the night to mention it at all, or if it's still too soon, too much, layered on top of everything else we're already carrying. In the end, I decide not to force it into a script. I've spent enough of my life being careful with people. Tonight, I want to try trusting my instincts instead. The doorbell rings just as I'm setting the table. Outside, Daniel stands on the front step with the flowers held a little too tightly in one hand, staring at the door like it might tell him something if he waits long enough. He runs through his opening line one more time in his head, discards it, tries another, discards that one too. Nothing feels like enough and nothing feels like too much either. He's just a man standing on a porch, holding flowers, hoping he hasn't already used up whatever grace he might have left. Inside, I hear the bell and stand there for a second longer than I need to, one hand resting flat against the counter, steadying myself the way you do before stepping into cold water. 15 years led to that grocery store. That grocery store led to this doorstep. And now there's nothing left standing between us but a few inches of wood and a lifetime of things unsaid. I wipe my hands on a dish towel, take one more breath and walk toward the door. My hand closes around the handle. I can feel him waiting on the other side, the way you can sometimes feel a person's presence even through something solid. For a moment, everything narrows down to this single point, this single door, this single threshold between everything that was and whatever comes next. I turn the handle and I open it. Once the plates are cleared and the table sits quiet between us, I get up without saying much and go retrieve the envelope from where I tucked it earlier, upstairs, safe. I I set it down in front of him gently, the way you'd set down something fragile. I explain what it is. That our mother wrote it in her final weeks, sealed it herself, and asked me to give it to him when I felt the time was right. That I've carried it for 11 years, unsure if that time would ever actually come. Daniel stares at it for a long moment before he even touches it, like he's afraid it might not be real. When he finally picks it up, his hands are shaking so badly it takes him 2 tries to open the seal without tearing the paper underneath. I don't read over his shoulder. I give him that privacy, watching instead the way his face changes as his eyes move down the page. I don't know the exact words our mother chose, but I don't need to. I can see them landing in real time, written in a mother's forgiveness, in her stubborn belief that the man she raised was still in there somewhere. Worth waiting for, worth loving, even after everything. Somewhere near the bottom of the page, Daniel breaks. Not loudly, just a quiet collapse of everything he's been holding together for 15 years. Tears falling freely now, years of self-punishment finally meeting a grace he never let himself believe he still deserved. I give him a few minutes to breathe, to fold the letter carefully back along its original creases, before I speak again. When he finally looks up at me, eyes still red, I decide it's time to tell him the rest. I tell him about the ticket, about the numbers that came up 8 months ago, the phone call from the lottery office that I almost didn't answer because I assumed it was a scam. $33 million, I tell him plainly, watching his face for whatever reaction might come. He just stares at me for a moment, like the words haven't fully landed yet. I explain why I never told anyone, why even Marisol only knows because I needed one person to keep me honest. I tell him about my cousin, about watching money hollow out every relationship she had left, and how I promised myself a long time ago I'd never let that happen to me. What Daniel says next tells me more about who he's become than anything else could have. He asks quietly, almost apologetically, if I'm telling him this so he understands why I'm not going to pay off what he owes, why I don't feel obligated to fix things for him just because I can now. It isn't greed in his voice. There's no calculation there at all, no hope flickering behind his eyes. Just a man bracing himself to hear that even now, he hasn't earned anything back. That's not why I'm telling you, I say gently. I need you to understand something else entirely. I choose my next words carefully because I know how much weight they're about to carry. I tell him I'm not interested in just handing him money and calling it fixed. That's not what I want for either of us. Instead, I tell him I want to help him build something real, starting with stable housing, somewhere steady he can actually call his own instead of a car or a room he's still getting used to. And beyond that, I want to help him get back to something he once dreamed of doing, whatever that trade or work might be now, something built with his own 2 hands, not something simply given to him. But I make the terms clear too. This has to be built on honesty, on effort, not on dependency, not on quietly falling back into old patterns neither of us can afford to repeat. Daniel goes quiet for a long moment, and I can see the war happening behind his eyes. Shame first, the old instinct that tells him he doesn't deserve any of this. And beneath that, something else, fragile and unfamiliar, something that looks almost like hope, the kind he probably stopped letting himself feel years ago. What if I mess it up again, he finally asks, voice barely above a whisper. Then we'll deal with that together slowly. Honestly, I tell him. That's exactly why we're not going to rush this. No blank checks. No shortcuts. Just steady steps and both of us paying attention. He nods, tears gathering again, and this time he says yes. Thank you, Daniel says, and his voice cracks right down the middle of the words. Not just for this. For finding me at all. For the letter. For giving me a second chance I never thought I deserved, not after everything. He says it like the offer of housing and work is almost secondary, like the real gift, the one that actually reaches him, is simply that I chose to see him again instead of walking away that day at the register. That I chose him after everything when I had every reason not to. I don't have words ready for that. I just stand up and he stands too, and we meet somewhere in the middle of that small kitchen, arms wrapping around each other the way they haven't in 15 years. He's thinner than I remember from childhood, but the shape of him hugging me back feels exactly the same underneath it all. Familiar in a way that goes deeper than any amount of time apart could erase. Neither of us says anything for a while. We just stand there, holding on, letting 15 years settle into something softer than either of us expected it could ever become again. I think standing in that embrace about the ticket still sitting somewhere in my coat pocket from that very first Friday. About the $33 million sitting quietly in an account I've barely touched. None of it, I realize now, was ever actually the prize. This moment right here was the thing I'd been carrying toward all along, long before I even knew I was looking for it. Several months have passed since that night in my kitchen, and looking back on them now, I'm struck by how ordinary the progress has looked. No dramatic turning points. Just steady, quiet steps, one after another. Daniel is settled now in a small apartment of his own, modest but stable, the kind of place with his name actually on the lease this time. He's been working toward opening a little repair shop, fixing small engines and appliances, a trade he loved as a young man before everything fell apart and he never let himself pursue it again. I helped set things up carefully, bringing in a financial advisor, putting real agreements in writing, doing everything I could to avoid the pitfalls I'd always feared most. What surprises me most, though, isn't the shop or the apartment. It's Daniel himself. He shows me his budgets without my ever asking. Walks me through his spending, his savings, his slow progress toward the shop's opening, laying it all out plainly, like a man determined to earn trust back one transparent decision at a time, rather than simply asking for it with words. Watching him, I feel something I haven't let myself feel in a long time where he's concerned. Quiet pride. Cautious but real. Not everyone in my life has been as easy to convince as I've been. Marisol, when she finally learns just how much I've committed to Daniel's fresh start, doesn't hide her concern. She isn't unkind about it, but she doesn't soften it either. She reminds me, gently but firmly, that good intentions and structured agreements didn't stop what happened 15 years ago, and asks me point blank what makes this time any different. I don't have a perfect answer for her. I just tell her I have to trust my own judgment on this one, even if it scares me a little too. Around that same time, though I don't learn about it until later, Daniel runs into someone from his old life. A face from those rougher years, someone who still moves in the kind of circles Daniel worked so hard to leave behind. This old acquaintance shows up outside the store one evening, friendly at first, then not so friendly, dropping hints about an opportunity, easy money, the kind of offer built entirely on exploiting exactly the kind of desperation Daniel used to live inside of. It's a small moment, easy to miss if you're not paying attention. But it's also quietly the truest test either of us has faced since that Friday at the register. Not the letter. Not the money. Daniel turns him down. Flatly, without hesitation, recognizing the offer for exactly what it is. A door back into the kind of life he spent months carefully closing behind him, one honest step at a time. But what matters more than the refusal itself is what he does right afterward. He calls me. Not days later, not after quietly deciding whether it was worth mentioning at all, but that same evening, voice a little shaken, telling me exactly what happened, word for word, without me having to ask a single question to pull it out of him. There was a time not so long ago when he would have buried something like this. Handled it alone. Hidden it out of fear. Let shame make the decision for him the way it always used to. Instead, he handed it to me plainly, trusting me with it the same way I'd trusted him with the truth about the money. I tell Marisol about it a few days later, almost in passing, and I watch something shift in her expression as she listens. She doesn't say she was wrong to worry. She's too practical for that. But I can see her skepticism soften just slightly, replaced by something closer to cautious respect. Trust, it turns out, isn't rebuilt in a single grand gesture. It's rebuilt in moments exactly like this one. A few months later, on an ordinary Friday, I asked Daniel to come with me to the store. Not for anything urgent. Just for our usual errand, the one I've kept up faithfully for over 20 years now. The one that started all of this the day he looked up from behind that register. We walk in together this time, side by side, instead of him standing on the other side of a counter, waiting to check me out. The same flickering light still hums over the produce section. The same squeaky wheel still finds its way into somebody's cart. Nothing about the store has changed, but everything about walking through it feels entirely different now. At the register, I fill out the slip the way I always do, the same numbers I've used my whole life, and Daniel watches over my shoulder, quiet for a second before he says he remembers them too. Birthdays. People we loved. People we still love. We buy the ticket together this time. $1, same as always, except this time there are two names standing behind it instead of one carrying it alone. Neither of us expects to win anything. That was never really the point, not back when our mother first started this tradition and not now either. The value was always in doing it together. We just forgot that for a while. Walking back to the car together, ticket tucked safely in my bag, I find myself thinking about how strange it is that something so small could lead to something so enormous. Not the money. Honestly, these days I barely think about the $33 million sitting in that account. Changed my circumstances, but it never once changed my heart, not the way this did. What actually changed everything was one ordinary Friday errand, the same errand I'd been running for over 20 years without incident, suddenly turning into the moment my brother walked back into my life. 15 years of silence, undone not by the fortune-eyed one, but by a 5-second glance across a checkout counter. I think about our mother, the way I do more often than I used to lately, and I wonder if she can see where we've landed. I hope somewhere she knows her letter finally found its way into the right hands, at the right time, exactly the way she trusted it would. Daniel walks beside me, quiet, comfortable in a way he wasn't even a few months ago, and I glance over at him, this man I raised, lost, and finally found again, and I think simply that whatever this whole strange story turns out to mean in the end, it was never really about the win at all. It was always about getting him back. A year has gone by now since that dinner in my kitchen, and it still catches me off guard sometimes, how ordinary our lives have become together. Daniel's little repair shop is up and running, doing well enough now that it stands entirely on its own. No more support from me beyond what I gave him at the very start. That detail matters more to him than almost anything else, I think, and honestly it matters just as much to me. Watching him build something with his own 2 hands, sustained by his own effort, means more than any amount of money ever could. As for me, I've started letting myself enjoy a little of what I have. Nothing extravagant. A nicer coat this winter. A trip I never would have let myself take before. I'm still the same woman who clips coupons out of habit, but I've stopped treating comfort like something I need to earn twice over. Most Sundays now, Daniel comes over for dinner the way it used to be when we were young before everything fell apart. We talk easily now, about small things, mostly the kind of unremarkable closeness that once felt completely out of reach. It's a quiet kind of life we've built back together. And lately, I've been thinking it might finally be time to visit our mother. We go together on a quiet Sunday morning, the cemetery mostly empty, sunlight slanting soft through the trees. Daniel has never stood at this grave before. 11 years, and this is his first time. He kneels down slowly in front of the headstone, one hand resting flat against the cool granite, and he starts talking to her quietly, like she's right there listening, which maybe in some way she is. He apologizes first for everything, for the money, for the years of silence, for missing the ending she deserved to have him present for. And in almost the same breath, he thanks her too for the letter, for never once giving up on who he could still become, even from wherever she'd already gone. I stand beside him the whole time, not saying much, just present, the way I couldn't be for either of them 11 years ago when I stood here completely alone. It feels different now, carrying this moment with someone instead of carrying it by myself. Before we leave, Daniel reaches into his pocket and sets something small beside the headstone. A lottery ticket, the one we bought together that Friday months ago, our old family number still written across it. Neither of us ever checked if it won anything. It never really mattered. We leave it there together, a quiet thank you, tucked gently into the grass beside her name. I've had a lot of time to think about what $33 million actually did for me. It changed the number in my bank account. It changed what I could afford, what I no longer had to worry about, the kind of safety net most people never get to feel underneath them. But it didn't change my life. Not really. Not in any of the ways that ended up mattering most. What changed my life was $1. A ticket I didn't even need, bought out of habit more than hope, at a register where, by pure chance, my brother happened to be standing that particular Friday. I think about how easily I could have missed it entirely, if I'd gone through the self-checkout instead. If I'd come in 10 minutes earlier or later. If some part of me, tired and guarded, had decided walking away was safer than staying to hear my name spoken in a voice I hadn't heard in 15 years. I'm grateful, more than I know how to properly say, that I stayed instead. Money can buy a lot of things. It bought Daniel a roof and a workshop and a little breathing room to rebuild. But it never could have bought what actually happened between us. That part we had to build ourselves, one honest conversation at a time. It's Friday again. Daniel locks up his own little shop just as the sun starts dipping low. wiping his hands on a rag out of habit before meeting me at my car. No register to hand off to someone else anymore. No manager watching the clock. Just him, closing his own door, coming to find me the way he does most weeks now. We drive to the store together, the same one, the same flickering light still humming faintly over the produce section. It's routine now, comfortable in a way that still catches me off guard sometimes, considering how it all began. I fill out the slip while he grabs a couple things we forgot for dinner, and at the register we buy our ticket together, same old numbers, same familiar ritual, neither of us expecting a single thing to come of it. We never do win, not that either of us keeps close track. That was never really why we kept doing it. Back at my house we eat something simple, laugh about something small, the kind of evening that wouldn't make it into anybody's story if you were looking for excitement. And that's exactly what makes it feel like enough. Just an ordinary Friday spent with someone I love, doing something we've always done. Some things, it turns out, really are worth more than $33 million. One evening, not long after, I stop by Daniel's shop just as he's closing up, and I watch him ring up a little something for a customer at his own small register. The same easy motion I remember from that first Friday, except everything about it feels different now. Before I leave, we do our little ritual right there. One more ticket, same old numbers. His hand steady this time as he scans it and hands it back to me with a grin instead of a frozen stare. No hesitation. No shock. Just two people who know each other completely, standing on the same side of the counter for once. I think back sometimes to that first afternoon, to the version of me who almost turned around and walked out of that grocery store without a second glance. I think about how close I came to missing all of this entirely. People ask me sometimes what I did with the money after I won. I tell them the truth. Changed a few things. But it was never the real prize. The real prize was a single dollar spent out of habit on an ordinary Friday that happened to lead me back to my brother. I never did check if that particular ticket won anything. Didn't need to. It already had.